July 1187. The hills of Hattin in Palestine are a furnace. Mail-clad soldiers stagger through dust and smoke, tongues swollen, lips split, eyes burning. They came here to rescue a besieged city and defend the true cross. Instead, they are walking into a plan that has taken their enemy years to build, one that kills not with a single blow, but with heat, fear, and thirst. Long before the Crusaders ever marched out, Salahuddin Ayyubi was fighting a different kind of war. He knew that as long as Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia were divided, Jerusalem was safe behind a shield of Muslim rivals. So he spent years crushing rebellions, negotiating with stubborn emirs, and stitching together a fragile unity. Every city brought under his banner meant more soldiers for him, fewer allies for the Franks, and one step closer to isolating the kingdom of Jerusalem. While he unified his own world, he studied his enemies. Saladin's scouts rode the roads of the Crusader states, measuring how fast their armies could move and where they were forced to march. They marked every spring, every cistern, every well that still held water in the burning months of summer. On those maps, the Crusader kingdom began to look less like a cross of stone and more like a body with a single weak organ, its dependence on a few veins of water in a dry land. Saladin understood that steel alone would not break that body. Thirst would. His officers quietly seized key springs and high ground, erecting outposts where a desperate army might hope to drink. Some wells were choked with rubble or fouled so that the water turned to filth. Whether poisoned, polluted, or simply denied, the result for the Crusaders would be the same: no relief, no escape, no way to keep marching in the heat. He was turning the landscape itself into a silent ally. When the time was right, he struck not at Jerusalem, but at its pride. His forces suddenly appeared at Tiberias, besieging the city and trapping Countess Eshjava behind thin walls. It was a deliberate insult, a challenge the Latin kingdom could not ignore without shattering its own sense of honor. In their war council at Sepphoris, some lords begged the king to stay put by the good springs and force Salahuddin to come to them. Others demanded a march, no matter the risk. Salahuddin was nowhere in that tent, yet he had already chosen the winner. He was betting everything on their pride and fear. The Crusader host marched into the July sun, away from the security of Sepphoris, and straight into the geography Salahuddin had prepared. Hour after hour over scorched hills, dust filling their mouths, armor baking their skin. Every step took them closer to the Horns of Hattin and farther from water. Wherever they turned, the wells they needed were already in Muslim hands or ruined or out of reach behind clouds of arrows. Men began to drop from the ranks, not from wounds, but from exhaustion and despair. By evening on July 3rd, the Crusaders had not reached the cooling shore of the Sea of Galilee. Instead, they were stranded on the twin volcanic mounds of Hattin, ringed by Salahuddin's forces. That night, Muslim soldiers set fire to the dry grass and brush, sending choking smoke into the tightly packed Crusader camp. Drums pounded in the darkness, shouts and war cries echoing around the hills. There was no rest for the thirsty and no silence for the afraid. It was not just a physical trap now, but psychological torture. At dawn, the Crusaders tried to fight anyway. Formations formed, banners rose, and they pushed downhill in a desperate attempt to break through to the water they could almost see. Saladin's archers and cavalry closed like a tightening hand. Arrows rained down, horses balked and fell. Units broke apart searching for any gap, any trickle of water. The true cross was planted on the hilltop as a rallying point, but even faith could not steady shaking legs and blistered tongues. By midday, The army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had ceased to exist. Clusters of survivors surrendered or were cut down. The king himself was dragged from the chaos, a captive. The true cross lay in Muslim hands. For some of the captured warrior monks, the Templars and Hospitallers, there would be no ransom. Many were executed in cold blood, a calculated removal of Saladin's fiercest enemies. Castles across the kingdom began to fall, their garrisons surrendering as the news of Hattin reached them like a death sentence carried on the wind. The road to Jerusalem was open, but the real victory had come earlier, in years of patience and calculation. Saladin had unified divided lands, napped every weakness of his foes, and turned wells, fire, and heat into weapons as deadly as any blade. Hattin was not just a battlefield, it was the final act of a long, dark strategy in which an entire kingdom was led, step by step, into a place where courage could not save it, because the water was already gone.